welcome back to another Java tutorial. My name is Kelvin from Firehawk Productions. In the last tutorial, I taught you guys how to use loops, specifically the while loop, as you can see here. And as I promised, I would be continuing loops, except I would be teaching you the for loop instead. What's the difference between a while loop and a for loop? Well, the only thing that differs is the conditions. So as you can see here, the while loop has a condition that says if a number is less than 10, then continue to run the loop. On the other hand, if you have a for loop, the conditions are much different, and personally, I think it's more useful. Well, actually, it's more useful depending on certain situations. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new class, like always, and I'm going to name it a for loop example. Okay, as always, create the main method. And don't forget to put comments. All right. So, the structure of the for loop is like this. For, and then you have two semicolons, open curly brackets, and then end curly brackets. And I'm just going to put a comment here to indicate that the for loop has ended. All right, so how do the conditions differ from the while loop? Well, the for loop actually has a condition with three different parts to it. The first part, I'm going to write it out and I'll tell you what it is. Okay, actually I'm going to write out all the parts first, and then I'll explain to you what each one means. Okay, so what does this mean? Okay, in the first part right here, before the first semicolon, it states int I equals 0. So what I've done with writing this is I created a new variable called I that's an integer and it equals to 0. So I initialized the variable I. Okay, so how about the second one? The second one says I is less than 10. Now what this means is, in the for loop, when I created my variable I, it starts at 0, and while I is less than 10, continue running my loop. Okay, and finally, the last part here, it says I++, and from what we learned before, I++ just means add 1 to I every time. So if we put this all together, what does this mean? Well, the first part here is called the initial condition, which is, actually no, that's not what it's called. You're just initializing a variable, and while it's less than a certain number or a certain integer, then keep looping this block of code. And then finally, at the end of the loop, add 1 to I. So let's say if I were to print out I love Java, then what will happen? First, it'll say first I will be initialized, so it'll equal 0, and then it'll check, is I less than 10? Yes, because I equals 0. Okay, so run this loop, which is it'll print I love Java, and then I will get added 1 to it, so I is now 1 instead of 0. And then it loops again, and it'll say, is I less than 10? Yes, because I is now equal to 1. So it'll print out I love Java again. And then at the end of that loop, it'll add 1 to I again, so now I is 2, etc., 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 until I becomes 10. Once it becomes 10, then the for loop ends. So this middle section here is kind of like the same condition as what we had in the while loop. So if I run this, just to show you what I mean, it'll print out I love Java 10 times. We count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so it's pretty much like the same idea as the while loop. All right, but what's special about the for loop is that you can utilize this variable here. You can utilize I. And what I mean by that is, let me show you. If instead of printing I love Java, I'm just going to print the variable I. All right, let's see what happens. I'm going to press run, press OK. And then you can see here that it printed 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And why did it do this? Well, you started off with I being 0, and then you printed it. So you see 0 right here, and then it'll plus, and then I will plus 1, so now it equals 1, and then runs through the loop again, and it'll say, is I, which is now 1, less than 10? Yes. So it'll continue printing I, which is now 1. And it continues doing this until all the way it reaches 9, and then once it gets to 10, it'll check, well, now I is equal to 10. Is I, which is 10, less than 10? No. Therefore, the loop stops. And so that's exactly how the for loop ends. Okay, well, this is pretty much the gist of the for loop. Nothing much to it, pretty similar to the while loop, except you have now created a new variable inside, which is, in this case, I. So that's pretty much it. Anyways, thanks for watching. In the next tutorial, I'll be teaching you about arrays, a topic which I should have covered before teaching you loops, and you'll realize how much more useful the for loop is when I teach you about arrays. So again, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and see you all next video.